Hi Sparkies! It's been great to at least be able to be with you all virtually on Zoom the last few months. Great job to all of you in joining each week and saying your verses over Zoom to your leaders. So today's story, we're going to look at another Bible story. And as we've talked about in some of our other lessons, our lessons in our Bible lessons each week are 100% true, and we know this because they come from the Bible. So today we're going to talk about Daniel. I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with some parts of the story of Daniel, and actually the story we're going to be focusing on today you're probably familiar with, but I want to bring out some other details as well. So if you're going to follow along with our story and you have your Bibles with you, or you can pause the video and grab your Bible so you can follow along, and then open your Bible to Daniel chapter 6. That's going to be where we're going to be spending most of our time in our lesson today. But first I want to go over just a little bit of the history of Daniel. So when Daniel was a young man, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, came and conquered Israel and took some of the Israelites captive. And there was many things. Daniel was in captivity under Nebuchadnezzar for many years. There's so many things that happened with Nebuchadnezzar. Dreams that Daniel interpreted to him and ways that God humbled Nebuchadnezzar. And if you want to hear a little bit more about those stories, we have been covering the life of Daniel in some of our Sunday school lessons, and you can feel free to watch those. So after Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, who ruled over the Chaldeans, who were the people there, his son Belshazzar was the next king. And then in what pretty amazing story of how God first revealed to Belshazzar that he was going to be conquered by another people. Handwriting on the wall that Daniel once again was brought in to interpret and help Belshazzar understand what was going to be happening next. So then the Chaldeans, and who Belshazzar ruled, were conquered by the Medes after that. And so in the story we're going to focus on today, the Medes were the ones in the power. They were ruling over the Chaldeans and then also over the Israelites who had been taken captive by the king of Babylon, by Nebuchadnezzar. So the king at the time in our story is Darius, and he's the one who's ruling over the Medes, Persians, Chaldeans, and the Israelites. So Darius was a very powerful king, and he appointed 120 leaders and 3 administrators to help him rule the kingdom. Now Daniel was one of those 3 administrators that King Darius had appointed. So when Daniel was a young man, he had been taken captive from Israel. He had been brought to this country, and now here in this story we see that in the ways that God's used him and brought him to this point, he's being set up as one of the top leaders of the country under King Darius. So we see in Daniel 6 verse 3, then it says, "Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials, because an excellent spirit was with him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom." Now, we don't know how old Daniel was in each of these parts of the story, but from what we know with what historians have said, he was pretty young when he was taken captive, probably a teenager. But by the time that this story is happening, he's probably 70 or 80. So he's been in captivity for a long time. But he's also served God well and served the kings he's been under well for many, many years. So, as we just talked about, Daniel was made one of the top rulers. And there were some of the other officials and rulers that were jealous of Daniel. And so they began to watch Daniel to find out if he did anything wrong, if there was anything that they could accuse him of to King Darius. Any way that they could get Daniel removed from being a leader. But because Daniel was such a faithful man, he was a righteous man, he served God, he served the kings he was under so faithfully, he followed the various rules of the lands that were put in place, that he could do so without disobeying the rules that God had set up. The Bible tells us that these men could find no fault with Daniel. It's pretty incredible to think about, that the kind of life he lived, they were able to find no fault with him. It shows us just how upright of a life he lived and how God used him as an influence in this country. So then these men, they started counseling together. They started talking to each other, and they're like, well, we're not finding anything wrong with Daniel, But the only way we're going to find something wrong is if we can get the king to make a rule that's going to go against something with Daniel and his God. Because they knew that what they'd seen, that Daniel would not violate what God had set up. So do you know what these wicked, jealous men did? They went to King Darius and they said, "Oh, king, live forever." Now this was something that was pretty common, people to say to kings back then. And they said, "All of your counselors, high officials, and governors agreed that the king should set up a law." So they wanted them to write this new law that any person that makes a petition to any god for the next 30 days, other than you, O king, should be cast into a den of lions. So anyone that prayed, anybody that talked to anybody, God or any official other than the king, will be cast in this den of lions. And then they said, "Now, king, establish this law and sign it so that it cannot be changed. For according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, when a king signed a law and sealed it, it was sealed and it could not be changed." So King Darius went ahead and he did this. He listened to these wicked counselors and he went ahead and signed this injunction, the law, the document. Now when Daniel had heard that King Darius had signed this law, do you think he just stopped praying for 30 days? He was like, "Oh, I'll wait on afterwards." Or try to do it in such a way that he wouldn't be noticed? No, Daniel, he went back to where he stayed. He went back to his chamber and he opened his window towards Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem for the Israelites was a symbol of where they would worship God. That was their place of worship. So when he was in captivity, he would look towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God. And this is what he'd been doing before this law was made, and he continued to do this, praying 3 times a day, even after the law was made. Because he knew that he couldn't violate what God had told him. He wasn't going to go follow the law of the land that violated what God had set up. Then these wicked men, they've been watching Daniel, and when they had also gotten King Darius to sign this law, and they came and they saw Daniel making a petition, praying to God. Then these men, they went back to the king, and they said, "Oh, king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" So these men went back to King Darius to get Daniel in trouble, because they still wanted to get Daniel removed. That's their main goal here. The king answered and said, "The thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be changed." Then they answered and told the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petitions, praying 3 times a day." Now when the king heard these words, when they had said these things to him, he was very upset. He was very distressed. And he set his mind that he wanted to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men, they came back to the king, and they said to the king, "Know, king, that it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king, when Daniel was cast in, he said to him, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And so Daniel had been cast into this den of lions, probably a group of very hungry lions. And the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. So not only was he in this den of lions, but the den was sealed. And the king sealed it with his own signet. This meant that no one could come and remove the stone to rescue Daniel. And then nothing could be changed in that. Well, that night the king went back to his palace and he spent the night fasting. He couldn't sleep. So early the next day, the king got up and went in quickly to the den of lions. And he came close to the den where Daniel was, and he cried out. It says in a tone of anguish. He was very upset and sad. And the king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. And they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no harm." So God had protected Daniel, who had served him faithfully. And he had sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions to rescue Daniel here. Then the king was exceedingly glad, and he commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no harm was found of him. Not only was he still alive, but there wasn't even any harm found, any scratches. The lions had done nothing to him. And Daniel had trusted in God in all of this. He knew that maybe he would still die from following God's law instead of man's, or that God may rescue him. But either way, he trusted God and still did the right thing. Then the king commanded that the men that had maliciously accused Daniel, that they and their families would get thrown into the den of lions. And we're told that before they even reached the den, the lions overpowered them. And that's what ended up happening to the people that had accused him. They weren't ones that had served God or followed God. So then, guess what happens next? Not only does Daniel just been rescued, but there's more to it. King Darius ordered that everyone should show respect to Daniel's God. So not only did he go from saying that no one could pray to anybody besides the king, but now he was commanding his people to respect Daniel's God. So King Darius wrote to other people, nations. He wrote in all the languages of the people that he ruled over. And he made a new decree. He said, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So the king now has just written these letters to his people after he's seen how God has worked and protected Daniel. So the Bible tells us that Daniel prospered under the reign of King Darius, and then under the next king, Cyrus the Persian. So we see in this story that Daniel remained faithful to God, and he worshipped only the one true God, even when this meant that he was risking his life. He could have chosen to hide his faith for those 30 days, but Daniel chose to boldly continue to worship God and to pray to God 3 times a day. We are told that Daniel's fellow leaders could find no fault with him, as we talked about before. By this, we know that Daniel was following all the rules of the kingdom where he lived, where he was not only a captor there, he had been set up as one of the rulers there. When it came to not being allowed to worship or pray to God, this was something Daniel couldn't do. He was being asked to do something that broke God's law and went against the commandments God had given. Daniel chose to take a stand, even though it meant that Daniel was thrown into the den of lions, which would have been, whether he was rescued from that den or not, God would still been faithful to Daniel in that. God chose to rescue Daniel. And God chose to send his angels and protect his faithful servant Daniel. So this is our story for this week. Part of the story of Daniel. I encourage you to read the rest of the book of Daniel, maybe watch some of our other Sunday school lessons on Daniel. And I look forward to seeing you all on Zoom. Bye.